Welcome everyone to the Better Business Relationships Seminar, or webinar, I guess, with me, Jill Whalen from whatdidyoudo.with Jill.com, and Lori Carpenos and Christine Higgins. We're all here to talk about relationships in business. I don't know where we want to start this. Shall I hand it off to one of you wonderful ladies to maybe talk about a little bit about this, Lori or Christine?
Go, Chris.
Okay, sure. My husband and I have been having so much fun with this week, talking about, different aspects of business relationships. And one of the things that we were talking about, these, I think it's called, is it Myers-Briggs, the personality tests that everyone does, And we were talking about how funny that is because, people developed this tool so they could work better together. But what they end up doing is putting labels on themselves and kind of limiting what's possible for their teams. Because if you come to a conversation and let's say I'm collaborating with you, Jill, and you've done this test and I know that, and on this test you happen to be introverted and logical and this and that, then I'm going to come to that conversation with that picture of you in my head, and it's going to limit what's possible, not only for you, but for me, because I'm going to talk to you in a way that's consistent with what I think those words even mean. And, and so it's just really funny that they developed this tool to make teams work better together. But in fact, you're creating a bunch of labels and ideas about other people that kind of stopped the flow. Because when you already have an idea about who someone is, then you're not going to be listening to them, like really listening to them. You're going to be listening through this idea of who you think they are. And chances are good it's not going to match. It's not going to match what they're thinking. It's not going to match their experience. And it stops people from being curious and really listening. And that's really important when you're collaborating on projects. I think that's one of the things that makes business relationships kind of unique, is that often you're collaborating on a project and you don't get to pick and choose. Like, you get to pick and choose your friends, but when it comes to work, you've got your colleagues and you're there with them. And so if you're coming into that relationship already having ideas about, their ideas are always stupid, they, are not articulate, they're a pain in the neck, or whatever it is you have built around that, you're going to come to the conversation not listening. And that's so harmful in so many ways, and counterproductive. It can really stop a team from being in the flow of things when nobody's listening to one another.
That's such an important point. Yeah, when you were talking about the labels from Myers-Briggs, that's exactly what came to my mind, that if people have all of this thinking going on while they're trying to work with somebody, if they have all their thinking about who that person is, they're not going to be able to hear what the person is offering at all. It's like a smoke screen in front of them to bring out the most creativity and the most productivity from their team members. So I'm so glad you brought that up, Christine.
It's so interesting because we even without taking those tests and putting those labels on, like, that's what we do naturally anyway, is we'll start thinking about, okay, this person is like so and so that I used to know, and so our mind is naturally doing all that labeling and stuff. And so it's interesting what you say, that doing that beforehand even creates more more labeling and all that stuff. But that's I never thought of it that way. Why is it, Christine, you think that they, like, what do they think is good about doing these, having these tests and knowing this stuff about your colleagues?
I think what they were really trying to point to was separate realities. That, you put 10 people in a room together and each person is going to have their own experience of it. I think that's really what they were trying to point to, but they decided to systemize it because in business we like things that are systemized, and you can follow step 1, step 2, step 3. You can, print off 10,000 copies, distribute it to your whole organization. Everyone's nice and tidy and labeled, and then you can, it's industrialization, right? That's the kind of what we like to do. And so I think the intent was very well meant. And I think that if they just were able to see that what they're actually trying to accomplish is this idea that each and every person is going to have their own experience of the meeting, of the collaboration, of the interaction, I think that would be a whole lot more useful.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's something we can, explore further in this conversation, is the whole idea of separate realities and how that it does affect our whole work relationships. So many people get, they think their boss is a jerk, let's say. And, that was one of my blog posts recently. And yeah, I mean, maybe they are sort of acting what culture and society would call being a jerk, but if we look at it from a different perspective, from their perspective, that they're just acting out from their thinking in the moment, what's going on for them, maybe they have a boss who's a jerk about them and causing them to do certain things, or they believe it. So I think that's a interesting conversation for us to possibly explore further, if any of you would like to. Or also, we have some people who've joined us. If any of you have questions for us on this topic, that would be awesome. Just feel free to either raise your hands or wave like this, or unmute and ask.
Yeah, it's really great to have an interactive webinar where we can respond to certain questions. And until a question comes up, we'll talk amongst the three of us. So I was thinking along the lines of separate realities, that there's this understanding through our understanding of how mind, thought, and consciousness, the three principles, work together, that everyone is really innocent to their own thinking. So whatever thinking is on their mind, whether it's their boss is a jerk, or they can't work with this colleague or coworker, whatever thinking is on their mind is going to appear to be the whole truth, the whole truth of life, that and everybody else must see this. And the interesting thing in work environments, people love it when their coworkers agree with them. Yes, we have really a bad, difficult boss. So it's like a popularity contest where everybody kind of gathers around this idea of who this person is. And it's really detrimental to a team moving forward to have any thinking on their mind about who somebody is. What works best in a work environment is for people to realize that there is this invisible undercurrent of unlimited creativity, unlimited wisdom, unlimited capacity for productivity. And that comes about when people's minds are most quiet. I don't know if any of you heard of this study. It was done years and years ago, but they asked a group of high-level executives when they got their best ideas for their work. And not one of them said while they were on the job. The top 3 answers were driving in the car, in the shower, and on vacation, as I recall it now. I mean, it was so long ago, but that's what I recall from this study. And, you know, it makes perfect sense from what we know about the fact that it's formless, creative energy that is the source of all of our personal creativity and all of our personal motivation to move forward with a project. That's coming from something that is formless. It's a formless energy. So the less form we have on our mind, if this makes sense, the more we're going to tap into this unlimited creativity. And that's what team players want to bring out in each other. That's what really moves a team forward. When everybody is calm and settled down in their minds. And, you know, the more bosses of the world and managers gain this understanding, the more they're much more interested in creating an environment that's calm and supportive and even loving, you know, loving as far as being understanding and compassionate about one another. And that sometimes our coworkers go off base in their thinking. Sometimes they get lost in their thinking too. We all do.
So, Lori, what would you, I mean, you know that other people who don't already have this understanding, the first thing they're going to ask is, well, okay, so how do we create that environment where our minds are quieter? You know, what do you say to people like that? Or Christine, either of you?
About, you mean quieting the mind, getting into a quiet mind space?
Right. I mean, it makes sense. Yes, if we have a quieter mind, everyone's going to be happier and coming from that space. So, but it's work and we're busy.
Well, what I've found is that the less I take my personal thinking seriously, we all do personal thinking. I mean, we're all, you know, susceptible to going into the past, drudging up past memories, going into the future, worrying about what's coming next. But being in the present moment, well planted, without the mind going in these other directions, that's what brings me the quietest place in my own mind.
Yeah, and kind of touching on what both of you were talking about. So out of school back in 2000, I had my first job as a software engineer. And I had this was before I'd learned any of this. And I had a bad boss. You know, he was a yeller, and you never knew why or when or how he'd be yelling at you. And so I based my day, like my own personal thinking, I based my day on whether his car was in the parking lot or not when I got to work. Like I'd walk up, he'd always arrive before me. And so he'd always be parked at the front of the building. I'd walk up, I'd turn, I'd look to his spot. If his car was there, my thinking completely shifted. And I walked into the room going, oh crap, he's here. Now I'm good. And my productivity was really a lot lower on those days because I'm sitting there, what I did for this company, I designed user interfaces and the code to connect to their electric hardware. And so I'd go in and I'd be programming away or designing, doing what I needed to do. And then I'd see movement out of the corner of my eye, and I'm like, oh, is that him? And then my mind would go to, oh, is he going to come yell at me? Is he going to do this? What about, and I wouldn't be doing my job anymore. I would be so distracted worrying about what was going to blow up in my face that I wasn't I wasn't working. My body was there, but I'd, write a line of code and then go off thinking of other things. And I really wish I'd known what you were then, what you're pointing to, Lori, was that if I hadn't taken that thinking so seriously, then I still probably likely would have had that, thinking. I still don't like to be yelled at, but it doesn't bother me nearly the way it used to. But, the thoughts would have been more fleeting. And it also stopped me from having conversations with him that I really needed to have. My personal thinking stopped me from having those conversations, because I would sit there and think, well, if I go to his office and if he's in a bad mood, then the conversation's I would spend half an hour building up this whole huge imaginary scenario of what might happen. And the truth of the matter is, I really had no clue. I mean, none of us have a crystal ball, right? So I really didn't know what would happen. And one example, I wanted to work from home one day a week so I could take design classes at Mass Art in the afternoon. And it took me a good week to get ready to go and ask him if that was a possibility. And during that week, I can't even tell you how many hours I spent imagining, well, what if he says this? Okay, then I can say that. And what if he does this? Then I can do that. And what if he just yells at me? Okay, well, then maybe it's time to find a new job. And what if hours and hours of my life wasted thinking about all the things that he might say. I went in, sat down, showed him the class that I wanted to take, made my proposal. He said, yeah, sure, no problem. And that was our entire conversation. But it took me a week in order to be able to have that conversation. And wow, how nice it would have been to know what I know now. And I would have been able to go have the conversation, and it would have turned out however it turned out. And it would have been fine.
Yeah. And you think we would learn from, that the fact that it you had that, it was so simple when you did it. I'm sure you had previous experiences of that too, yet you still, built it all up in your mind. So it sounds like what both of you are saying is, by thinking of future thinking, when we're thinking in the future, what might happen or might not happen, or thinking in the past, what did happen before, it puts so much on our minds, and so keeps us so out of the present moment that, yeah, what a waste of time and productivity when if we were in the present moment, our minds would be clear, because but for thinking of future or present, we have a clear mind, then we would know what to do, or we just would do what we're supposed to do. And you wouldn't be thinking about whether or not the boss's car is in the parking lot, or any of that stuff. That's that was a great illustration, Christina, thinking about all the time we waste in our heads. Oh.
Yeah. Whole lifetimes.
Life, yeah.
Great example. I love how you said, Christine, that whether his car was in the parking lot in the morning was going to set the tone for your entire day. How many people do something similar to that, every single day that they are coming into work?
Yeah, and I just tortured myself. I mean, it didn't impact anything. He didn't suffer for my, deciding to have a bad day. No one else it was all like I created my own personal suffering around the car being there or not.
Which is hilarious, because that shows you that the suffering wasn't coming from the boss, because just seeing the car in the parking lot, you were suffering. And so it's not even the boss. It's such a great illustration of how it's our thoughts that create the experience.
Suffering always comes from us. Always from our own mind. You can't get away from that fact. A hand went up.
Yeah, I see Karen had a question.
Oh. Let's see. I'm going to unmute.
Bill's just going to
Karen.
unmute you, Karen.
Oh, thank you.
Go ahead.
Am I unmuted?
Yep.
So I'm sitting here thinking, because I'm a boss, and so
A mean
yeah,
one.
how many people wonder when my car is sitting there when they come into work? You know, I do think differently than some of my employees, and I am pretty intense at work, and so this like makes me think a lot differently about how I am when I'm there. So not also with my partner, my business partner, but the people who work under me, because gosh, again, I would hate for someone to feel the way you felt, Christine, walking into my store, you know, with my employees. That would hurt my heart. So if, you know, so it helps me not only to be not being in my own head, but to be aware of their head and where they are when they walk in. So that's interesting. I thank you for that.
That's great. That's awesome. Yeah, because each person's going to be having their own experience of whatever the interaction is.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's really helpful just to get curious, curious about what their perspective is. Yeah, where they're coming from.
Have the courage to have that conversation even. I think that sometimes it's just having the courage. And then once you have it, you think, oh gosh, that was so easy. Why didn't I do that? Like you said a long time ago. Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, that's awesome, Karen. Thank you for sharing that.
Yes, thank you, Karen. And also just not assuming, you know, we always assume that the way we think is just the way everybody thinks. And so, you know, you just would have no, like if you're not generally anxious or something around bosses, you wouldn't understand, or it wouldn't come to you that like a lot of people might just be anxious around bosses. It has nothing to even do with you. And so that, you know, you can't even, you wonder why they're acting so weird all the time. And it's just because that's just their personality, or, you know, they have a lot of thinking about bosses or whatever it might be. And so it's so helpful to just remember that the way we think isn't the way everybody else thinks. And it's probably not even close a lot of times.
Well, it's helpful to understand. I've had the experience of being the boss also. And, you know, your focus, at least for me, my focus was so very different from the people that were working for me. You know, I had all of my, you know, spreadsheets. I knew our numbers. I knew what we needed to achieve. I had, you know, kind of this like really big picture, like what's success going to look like here and how are we going to get there and what's in the way. And so that's not even information that it takes too much time. You can't let everyone working for you know, like, this is, you know, what I'm focused on. But it's helpful to know that we each have a different focus, like, you know, that that not everyone naturally will align with the goals that may or may not be presented to them. And so, yeah, but this is in the situation where I was the boss, that was after I had learned this. And it was so incredibly helpful. Not even, I mean, it was helpful in interaction with coworkers. It was also helpful. I was in a particularly stressful business situation, trying to save a business. And the other piece of this that we haven't talked about is also innate well-being. And it was really helpful to know that no matter what happened, I would be innately well. If I crashed and burned, no matter what happened, I would be okay. I would be fine. And that was incredibly helpful too, because then I was able to come to conversations, even though, you know, I had many concerns about what was happening. You come to conversations differently when you're in that, when you can really, really rest in that place of complete confidence that no matter how the cards land, you know, is that the right idiom? I always screw. English is my first language, but I still screw up the idioms. But just knowing that no matter how things turned out, I would be okay. And each of my employees would be okay. even if their jobs, I mean, there was the potential that jobs would all be gone within a couple weeks. I mean, and just knowing that we would all be okay. I wasn't caught up. My thinking was not like, what if this happens? What if that happens? What if we do it? What if I have to let them go? What if this happens? What, you know, and then problem solving becomes so much easier. You can come to the table and say, look, you know, knowing, not saying out loud, but knowing that we'd all be innately well, come to the table and ask people for ideas, or, you know, ask people to do things in a way that's not panicky or, you know, extra forceful, even though I was feeling that this was completely urgent, understanding that they might not be sharing, you know, my concerns. Yeah. So
it's really, isn't it something that I guess the majority of the world, right, will hinge their well-being, their sense of themselves, their identity, everything on their productivity in the workplace, or whether their boss likes their work or not. So the clients that I see, you know, throughout the years, whenever the conversation goes over to their work environment, so much of people's well-being is tied to what's going on at work. You know, when you think about it, you're spending more time at work than you are at home, most people. And so then people will come home with a bad feeling, and their home life is affected from that. What a difference, you know, like listening to your story, Christine, I could just see what a difference your experience would have been. And so many people's experience at work would be different if they just knew that everybody's moment-to-moment experience is coming from their own mind. Just that piece alone would change work environments like unbelievably. It was many, many years ago at a Three Principles conference. I think you two and Jill, maybe you know about Adams Outdoor Advertising. You know, it was the company that Mara Gleason's father worked for in her book, One Thought Changes Everything. So the CEO of this company was on the stage talking about something. This dates back to like the 90s, and that's how much this stood out in my mind. I still remember it today. He said that on Fridays, he would call his sales team at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, like clockwork, to get the numbers, the sales, how many sales they made that week. And they were way in the red. They were not doing well as a company at all. So this Steve Adams goes out to LaConner, Washington, works with the Pranskys, and comes back. Nobody ever said to him, you know, Steve, that's not a good idea to be calling your sales force on Friday. Nobody said that. They just taught him about how everyone's experience is coming from their own thinking, period, you know, in different variations on that theme. And he wound up still calling them on Fridays at 3 o'clock. He never asked them what their numbers were. He asked them what their plans were for the weekend, how their family was doing. He got interested in their family members. He cared about the people who were working for him. And I got to tell you, you know, it was so astounding to hear this man talk about what a difference it made for his company. That company shot way up. As a result, they sold way more billboards than ever, never asking how many billboards got sold. It's state of mind. It's all about state of mind. And if people can see the value in that, that's really the most valuable resource every person comes to the table with. The ability to be together in a nice state of mind. and we lose it. We lose track of it. We all get caught up in our thinking. But if a team of people understand how this works, then they're there to help each other. They can see when somebody's off base. They can see when somebody got all caught up. And they can just do whatever they do to help them out, to settle them down.
Yeah, it's a good illustration. I mean, a whole team knowing this stuff would be amazing, but it only does take one, if you know it, that alone can change the team even, which is amazing as well, because if you change your perspective, how you see your team, they will change before your eyes, which is the magic in this.
Absolutely.
Does anybody have any questions? Any other questions? We have a few people on.
Or comments,
Or comments,
questions, yeah.
Not yet. What else? Anything else come to mind for any of us?
Let's see, we talked about, are there any of these points that you'd like to go deeper with? We talked about separate realities, how people see things so differently, and everybody thinks that everybody's seeing it the same as they are. We talked about innocence, that people are innocent to their own thinking. They don't realize that it's their thinking that's running the show in that moment. We talked about innate health, that when our personal thinking calms down, we drop into a healthy state of mind.
And I was just thinking we can follow up a little bit about, when you in the instance where you might have a lot of people that understand this, and you said, you can help each other, calm down, get to a better space. The other thing is, it's even helpful, like Jill was saying, even if your whole team doesn't know it, whoever knows it, whatever, it doesn't really matter so much, because for those who understand, they'll understand, one, not to make any big decisions or do anything when they're caught up in their thinking. If you can see when you're caught up in your thinking, that's not the time to, have a big meeting that's important. And, that's a time to take a time out. Everyone uses timeouts with kids, and they use them as punishment. But I think that if you see what the value in a timeout, not as a punishment, but as a really, like, you're caught up in your head, you're listening to, all this busy thought that's not productive. Take a break. And not only for yourself, but if you can see it in other people, then you can give them the space to take a break. Like, if, I can't know what exactly how I would have behaved if I'd understood this when I had that boss that was yelling and things like that. But I can imagine that if I'd been in that situation again and he was yelling at me, I would be able to say, oh, you know what? He's caught up right now. There's something, he's stressed out about something. I don't know what it is. I don't know if his numbers are bad. At that particular time, that was in 2000 when a lot of the tech stuff was crashing, and our team went from 212 people down to 15 people. So you can imagine that he might have had a lot on his mind, right? And so, as someone who, even though he didn't know it, I could have been in that conversation, listened to him, listened with compassion, instead of taking it personally, like, oh, he's yelling at me. Listen with compassion, thought, wow, you know what, if I knew I had to drop 90% of my workforce, like, yeah, I'd be really freaking out, too. I could see in his shoes how that might happen. And I would know that when someone's in that space, I don't want to like, I don't want to say don't want to deal with them, but don't, I'm not going to have an important conversation. I'm going to, let them talk, let them do what they need to do, exit the conversation politely and try again later. So I think that, it's less about actively doing something and more about just noticing and just seeing, and a lot of not doing, which is kind of hard because we like to fix things, we like to make things right, but you can't control someone else's experience ever. And so it's, it's nice to be able to just recognize where people are at and then, act accordingly.
And where we're at, because when we come from, if we're anxious, then like we can't do any of that stuff you were just talking about, and we can't see them that way because we're so anxious, and the anxiety seems to feed, people who are, if say the person is angry or stressed or whatever, then anxiety just feeds that, and sometimes seems like you just get into this thing because you get anxiety and anger all together. So seeing where we are and knowing that's not, like you said, take a time out, settle, and I mean, if we're anxious, it's because we're again caught up in thoughts that aren't true too, which is really a big key to all this stuff, to see more and more that our thoughts are not who we are. It's that innate health inside of us is who we are, that well-being, and that our thoughts are usually not telling us the important things that we need to know. That it's it's kind of amazing because we think our thoughts are us and are true and are telling us something important, and yet they're not at all. They're usually, I don't know, mine at least, pretty crazy and aren't helpful. And yet if I be beneath those thoughts, if I can get down to that innate wisdom inside of me, that's got the real juice. That's got the real information that I need to know.
Jill, I saw you raised your hand. Did you still want to speak?
Good. I will unmute. Go ahead.
Hi. I'd just like you to share a little bit about how you work with teams to get them to see it. Because it's all very well to, for me, I work as a coach and trainer. So it's okay for me to see it and for me to help them, just to share it with them and for them to see these things. But then when I walk away, they seem to, slip back into the old sort of outside-in way of thinking and seeing things again quite quickly. So I'm just interested to know how you work with teams. What does it look like?
Yeah, sure. Lori, do you want to answer? Do you want to go first on that one? Or do you want?
Well, I personally have never worked with teams, really, small teams, but so why don't you go first, Christine? Because there's something else I wanted to speak to, so I'll catch that after.
Okay. Sorry, you were nodding your head, and I thought maybe you had. All right. So it sounds to me, and this is obviously me making it up, but this is what it sounds like to me, is that there's opportunity for them to go deeper. That maybe they're seeing it on an intellectual level, but it hasn't sunk into what you might call the heart level or the knowing level. Like when you learn, I'm an engineer by training. And so when I first learned algebra, I kind of got it. I could follow the steps and get a good grade on my test. But it wasn't until much later that I really understood what those numbers meant. I was like, oh, and I could generate the equations from myself, from my understanding, because I really got it. And so it sounds to me like a lot of the people are kind of in that space where they know, like, oh yeah, well, that's just coming from my thinking. And so then they might still be thinking about their thinking, doing some meta thinking. And then once it sinks, which is a fine place to start, we all start there. You know, it's a good idea until it's becomes more. And then once, you know, they have the time. And so that's what it sounds like to me. Do either of you have?
Like everything, it's, you know, about staying in the conversation, because all of us forget. You know, we all forget that it sure seems like other people are causing us whatever, our grief. And so even though we know it's coming from thought in the moment, we really don't know it, as Christine said, until we have an insight about it. So it's, yeah, it's just a matter of, hopefully, if you can, you know, keep being able to speak with these people, or providing them with other info, that they'll be able to continue on with it. Because yeah, I mean, it's, well, as you know, it's insight based. You know, without an actual insight, it's all theoretical, and it's helpful to a certain extent. But you know, what I like to tell people is, you know, just seeking the evidence for it in your own life, to me, was the most helpful thing. And I try to do it all the time. You know, looking for instances, and it happens all day long, where I thought something else or someone else was causing me to feel a certain way, and then looking for, all right, how was it me? You know, how did it come from my thought and not them? And so the more evidence I gather, the more I am at least intellectually certain that it's 100% true, even though I don't always see it. So for me, that's just what I find the most helpful thing.
It's like second nature to rationalize how we're seeing things. Like you were saying, Jill, that you know, you gather more evidence in the environment or from the other people. You see, of course, you know, there's validation that I'm right in my thinking. It's kind of human nature to do that. But it's wonderful to realize that that's not helpful. It's not helpful to get further into whatever we're thinking. In fact, you know, I've had this insight recently that I've really seen so much deeper. It's as though we human beings are either in a state of understanding and compassion for whoever's in front of you, whether it's a team or an individual, or in our own ego. You know, I mean, you can't really be in your own ego, having a bunch of personal thinking how this other person is affecting you negatively and blaming somebody for your bad feeling. You can't be there, which I would call that being in my own ego, taking things personally, and also be understanding that the other person is in their own thinking, reacting out and acting out of their personal thinking. And it feels so much better to be in a state of understanding and compassion than it does taking things personally.
That's so key. Is that helpful, Jill? Do you have any other comments or questions?
Yes, I think that's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Lori, did you have something else to share, or was that?
Well, that was pretty much it. You know, this seeing recently that it's, you know, there was a book written years ago called Love is Letting Go of Fear. You familiar with that book by an MD? And what I'm realizing now is that love is letting go of ego. You know, is when you can see that, oh, I just got caught up in a bunch of personal stuff. I had dinner with a cousin of mine last night, and we were talking about another relative who tends to get slighted a lot. You know, it's interesting that her thinking goes there. Why? You know, it's like a habit of thinking, and it looks real to her that people are excluding her, leaving her out, or somehow she's been slighted. And she uses that word too. I got slighted again. Well, and none of the rest of us see it that way at all. And, you know, that's certainly not our intention.
We see what we believe. You know, if that's her belief that she's always going to be slighted, then she's going to see it everywhere. That's our thoughts creating our experience of life. You know, whatever our beliefs are and our identity. I'm someone who gets slighted. That's it. That's what she sees everywhere until she realizes that's just a belief. But that's good luck.
Right. And that's part of, you know, how we validate how we see things. We can validate it. Well, you see, that person didn't say hello to me this morning, and that person looked the other way. You know, there's evidence. We can find evidence everywhere that will validate what our thinking is, no matter how off our thinking is.
Yeah. That was my blog post a couple weeks ago, that there's a million things we can be up in arms about, but why would we want to? Was the basic premise of the blog post. And because it's so easy to just find things. Oh, they did this, she did this, he said this, and it's easy to, but yet we can choose. I love what you were saying, Lori, about the ego and stuff, because that's actually probably this week's blog post I've been writing, is that we do have these like two minds, the ego mind, and it's really all one, but it feels like two in our heads, you know, this ego mind and then this wisdom mind. And while we can't choose our thoughts, I feel like that we have some choice. The other part of us, the consciousness, is the decision maker that can sort of choose which one to go with. Do I want to be compassionate, or do I want to be up in arms? I mean, it doesn't matter. We can be up in arms if we want to. And there's certainly a lot of things at work that can have us be up in arms, but that just causes us to suffer. It doesn't, yeah, it just causes us to suffer. I don't personally like suffering, so I'm trying more and more to come from that place of wisdom and compassion and love, because it's a love and fear. The ego is fear, and the wisdom aspect, or mind, or, you know, there's lots of words for it, is love. And we can choose at any moment. It doesn't feel like we have a choice a lot of times, but I think we do, to a certain extent.
Yeah, you know, the mind is so malleable. We can change our mind at any moment. I'm not saying intentionally, I'm not talking about positive thinking, but if you're open to seeing something in another light, you know, if you don't like the way something is looking to you, it's wonderful to realize there's always another way to see it. Even if I'm not seeing it right now, at some point I'll see it differently. It's like couples who come to me for counseling, and, you know, they're talking about a fight that they had just the night before. Neither one of them can remember what the fight was about. You know, the mind changes, and especially after we've had a good night's sleep, and we're well fed and watered, and we're in a better place.
It's a
Yeah.
shift.
So
It's a shift in consciousness, I think. That's how I think of it. At any second, even if you are totally caught up in your head, I've had this experience, totally caught up, mad, and suddenly I see something or I read something that totally, everything changes. A total shift in consciousness. The whole situation changes almost as if it never existed. Why was I mad or whatever in the first place? Because there's an infinite number of ways to see any situation. So just if our consciousness happens to shift to one of those other ways, it's a miracle, and it's amazing, and it's very helpful and useful in life.
Karen has a question.
Karen,
You're
you're unmuted.
I'm unmuted now. Okay. So my question is, so, I have had that. I've been in that bad place probably most of my life. So working on this consciousness and changing the way I think, do I have a sense of responsibility then also to be, I don't know, more compassionate to the people so they don't have to go into that place of thinking bad if I'm doing something that makes them go into that bad place, or, think to make them feel insecure because I feel insecure.
Can I just interrupt for a second? The whole crux of this is that you can't make anyone feel a certain way.
Right.
And so just understanding that alone, like, don't worry about that part, because
That is
they're
my
going to
big
feel.
thing.
Yeah, but they're going to feel how they're going to feel. Go on. I didn't mean to stop you.
No, that's what I was wondering, because I've always been like, I'm always worried about the other person, So, and my kids will say, Mom, you have to take care of yourself. You don't, and I go into these bad places in my head, but because I'm the caretaker. And like you said, I'm the one that wants to be the answer, find the answers, rewriting my story. So, I'm in a better place in my own head.
That's the key.
And that was my question. Yeah, thank you.
And we're going to talk about kids on our next webinar, but just quickly to touch on that topic of impacting others, I've gone to a lot of effort sometimes to create these really beautiful experiences for my children, like, nice gifts at the holidays or a vacation or a play date, whatever it is, and they hated it. It's complete proof that you can't control their experience, because, sometimes I'll do something that has, like, to me, shouldn't be a big deal at all, and my daughter will fall down in a crumble, like I just slapped her across the face or something, and I was like, I told you to put shoes on. Like, what was that? And other times I'll create this really what should be fantastic, and they're like, I just want to stay home. This is you really can't, because they're going to be, whoever it is, they're going to be in their own space. They're going to be, and I hear you, Karen, because I can't even count how many, I would say, until I learned this. So I spent 36 years really, trying to be the good girl, not, do things well so my parents were happy, trying to control everyone else's experience. As a parent and a wife, I tried to make sure that my husband had a good experience and my kids had a good experience. Like, wow, tons of effort. And now I can naturally take care of myself and do what I need to do, and be compassionate, both at the same time. It's not an either or. It's like I can take care of my well-being, knowing that they're taking care of their well-being, and as long as we all understand where, and actually they don't even have to, but I know where our experiences are coming from, and so I can approach them differently. So I think it's the same with employees, which makes difficult conversations much more easy. And it makes difficult conversations easy to have in a way that's also compassionate, taking care of the business needs, taking care of whatever needs need to be taken care of, and knowing that the other person's going to have their own experience, and that they, at their core, whether they know it or not, are innately well and will be able to deal with it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. We've only got a few minutes left, and I didn't mention at the beginning that these webinars that we're doing, we did one a couple of weeks ago that was about romantic relationships, which is online. If anyone wants it, I can just let me know later. I can send you the URL. but we're doing one in a few weeks on family relationships, like children and parents. So that one's free, welcome to be on. And these are all a prelude to our day-long seminar, which will be in Connecticut, Hartford, Connecticut on, what is it, November
4th.
4.
A Saturday. So anyone watching this or here on the call, I know some of you are from Europe, so probably won't be attending, but you know, feel free to look into that, and I'll put links to that stuff on the YouTube description too, as well, for these.
Oh, that's a good idea, Jill. Yeah.
Does any?
The early bird discount deadline is coming up, isn't it? October 4, I think.
I think so, and
That's
it's
right.
what, only $99, I think, for the whole day. So I mean,
It's a steal.
Yeah. Anyone have any other questions or last words to wrap things up?
I want to mention 2 books. There's an older book by Robert Cousin, and the name of it is We Have to Start Meeting Like This. For anybody in business who has to go through meetings, the premise of the book is that there are typically more meetings called in businesses than are necessary. You know? And I always hear clients complaining about all the meetings they have to go to. It really takes up too much of their time. They don't get their work done because of it. So that's a really great book I'd like to recommend. And the other book is more current, by Ken Manning and Robert Sharbit and Sandra Crott. The name of it is Insight Power. I think that's the
Invisible
name.
Power.
Invisible Power. Invisible Power. It's got a light bulb on the front cover.
Great.
Oh, Jill's got a copy.
Oh, there it is.
Great.
That's the one.
Thanks, Jill. Super.
Anything else? We hope some of you will join us on our seminar, and we'll see some of you on the next webinar.
Yeah, thank you for being here.
Thank you all.
Thank you. It's been really great.
Wonderful.
Really enjoyed it.
Okay.
Awesome.
Thanks, everybody. Hope to see you in a couple of weeks for our next one. Have a great afternoon,
So
or
long.
wherever you are.
Bye.
Have a great night if you're